I woke up in the dark. Not the kind of dark you get when you close your eyes, but the kind that presses down on you like the world itself is sitting on your chest. My arms couldn't move. My legs wouldn't stretch. My fingertips scraped against smooth wood. That's when the truth hit me like ice water. I was inside a coffin. Alive. Buried. I screamed until my throat split, but no one heard. No one answered. The air was thick, heavy, disappearing with every breath I stole. And through all the panic, one thought cut through like a knife. My husband did this to me. To everyone else, he was Richard Vale. Billionaire. Philanthropist. The Golden King of New York. But to me, he was the man who kissed me goodnight, slid a diamond ring on my finger, whispered forever into my ear, then shoved me into the ground like I was a piece of trash. The world worshipped him. I was supposed to love him. But in that moment, locked in my coffin, all I felt was the heat of betrayal. And then another voice rose up inside me, quiet but sharp. If you survive this, you'll take everything from him. That whisper gave me strength I didn't know I had. I clawed at the lid until my nails split. I kicked until the coffin cracked. I dug until my hands were nothing but torn skin and blood. When my body was ready to give up, I felt it, the coffin breaking. Air rushed in. Cold. Sharp. Saving me. I dragged myself through the dirt, coughing, sobbing, every muscle burning. But I was alive. Barely. For all his billions, Richard thought I was disposable. That a coffin could erase me. That nobody would notice if I was gone. But he didn't bury a victim. He buried the wrong woman. I staggered down a lonely road, barefoot and broken, dirt still clinging to my face, lungs burning with every breath. And that was when I made a vow. He thought the grave would silence me. Instead, it gave me a reason to fight. He buried me once. But now, I was going to bury him. Not in the ground. In his empire. I wasn't always the kind of woman who could claw her way out of a coffin. Once, I was just another girl staring out of a Brooklyn window, dreaming of more than rent checks and broken promises. My life changed the night I met him. Richard Vale. The name alone carried weight in every corner of Manhattan. Billionaire. Investor. Charmer. A man who walked into a room like it already belonged to him. I was working late at a gallery opening, carrying trays of champagne I couldn't afford to drink, when I felt his eyes on me. He had that smile. Sharp, confident, dangerous. And when he asked my name, it felt less like a question and more like a command. I should have known better. Men like him don't notice women like me unless they want something. But that night, I let myself believe I was different. That I was special. That Richard saw me, not just another pretty face in the city. Weeks later, I was wearing gowns I didn't buy, eating food I couldn't pronounce, sleeping in a penthouse with glass walls that made the skyline look like it was built just for us. He told me I deserved it. He told me he needed me. And I believed every word. The first red flag came quietly. He didn't like me going out without him. Said it was because he worried about my safety. Then came the second. My friends stopped calling, and I realized it was because he made them feel unwelcome. By the time I noticed the third, the way he never answered questions about his business, the way he changed the subject with a smile, it was already too late. I had traded freedom for diamonds, choices for security, and slowly, piece by piece, Richard Vale became the only world I had left. But behind the champagne toasts and charity galas, his eyes would sometimes go cold. I'd catch him watching me, like he was measuring my worth, calculating whether I was still an asset or already a liability. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just insecure, that every couple had problems. But deep down I knew. I should have run then, should have packed my things, disappeared before the cage locked shut. But I didn't. I stayed. Because I loved him. Or maybe because I wanted so badly to believe he loved me. And that's how a man like Richard Vale gets away with murder. People think betrayal comes with fireworks, with screaming matches and slammed doors. But the truth is, it's quiet. It slips in like smoke under a locked door, filling the room before you even realize you're choking. Richard's betrayals started that way. A late-night phone call he stepped out to take. A whispered conversation that stopped the second I walked in. A lipstick stain on a glass in his office that wasn't mine. He had explanations for everything. Always smooth, always polished. And I wanted to believe him so badly that I swallowed the lies, even when they tasted like poison. But the more I looked, the more I saw. Women at his events who looked at him like they'd already been promised something. Trips he took alone, claiming it was just business. Money moving through accounts I wasn't supposed to see. One night, I asked him directly. I still remember the way he smiled, calm and steady, as if I had just asked what we were having for dinner. "Don't be ridiculous," he said. "You're my world." But those eyes, those cold, measuring eyes, told me something else. I wasn't his world. I was his possession. And possessions can be discarded. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday night. He came home late, drenched but grinning, and for a moment I thought maybe it was love again. Maybe I was imagining all of it. Then I saw the text light up on his phone when he tossed his jacket over the chair. It wasn't from me. It wasn't business. Just 3 words, glowing on the screen like a brand burned into my chest. "I miss you." No name. No explanation. Just proof. Proof that I was no longer the only one. Maybe I never was. That night, lying in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling and listened to his breathing. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing him. I was afraid of what he might do to me if he decided I was no longer worth keeping. Because Richard Vale wasn't the type to break up. He was the type to erase. The days after that text felt different. Subtle, but undeniable. Richard wasn't trying to charm me anymore. He was managing me, like a problem he needed to solve. He started asking questions about my day that didn't sound like questions at all. Who I saw, where I went, how long I stayed. His tone was soft, but there was weight behind it, like he was logging every detail for later. He hired new staff for the house, people I hadn't met before. They didn't look like cleaners or cooks. They looked like watchers. Their eyes followed me everywhere. And when I tried to push back, he brushed it off with a laugh. "You worry too much. I just want to keep you safe." But safe from what? The truth revealed itself slowly, like a spider spinning a web around me. First, my credit card stopped working. He said it was fraud protection. Then, the car service I used to visit my sister suddenly canceled. Too busy, they said. After that, even my phone seemed different. Calls dropped mid-sentence. Texts never delivered. It wasn't paranoia. It was isolation. And the more I resisted, the colder he became. One evening, I caught him staring at me across the dinner table. His face perfectly calm, his glass of wine untouched. For a moment, I thought maybe he was about to confess. Maybe he'd admit the affair, apologize, promise to fix things. Instead, he smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. "You know, darling," he said, "you make my life so much easier when you don't ask questions." I froze, the fork halfway to my mouth. Because it wasn't a threat. It was a warning. And that was when I realized something. He wasn't planning to leave me. He was planning to erase me. I lay awake that night, listening to the sound of rain tapping against the glass walls of our penthouse. My reflection in the window looked pale, hollow, already half a ghost. And I couldn't shake the thought. If Richard had already decided my time was up, then maybe it was only a matter of when. Richard became gentler after that night. Too gentle. Flowers arrived at the house every morning, as if he'd remembered how to court me. He booked weekend trips to the coast, candlelit dinners in places I used to dream about. His hands lingered longer on mine, his eyes softened when they met mine. But it didn't feel like love anymore. It felt like preparation. Every gesture, every smile, every promise, it was all too perfect. Rehearsed. Like a man making peace before a crime. One night, over a glass of red wine, he told me we should start fresh. Just the 2 of us. No distractions, no outsiders. A getaway. A retreat. He made it sound romantic, but the way his hand tightened around the stem of his glass told me it was anything but. Something inside me screamed to say no. To run. To disappear before he had the chance. But my voice caught in my throat. I nodded, like the obedient wife he still pretended I was. And from that moment, every hour felt like a countdown. I tried to reach out to my sister, to an old friend, to anyone who might notice if I vanished. But my calls never seemed to go through. My messages disappeared into the void. The staff watched me like hawks. And Richard, he was always smiling, always patient, always one step ahead. The night before we were meant to leave, I stood in the bathroom staring at my reflection. My hands trembled as I touched the diamond ring he gave me years ago. Once, it had meant safety, love. Now it felt like a shackle. And deep down, I knew. The trip wasn't meant to save our marriage. It was meant to end me. The morning of the trip, Richard kissed me like it was our honeymoon again. He tucked a silk scarf around my neck, brushed my cheek with his thumb, and whispered, "Trust me." Those 2 words cut deeper than any knife. Because I knew. Trust was exactly what he wanted me to give before he took everything else away. The car that picked us up wasn't our usual sleek Blacktown car. This one was bigger. Tinted windows, heavy locks, the kind that didn't open from the inside. My stomach knotted, but I forced a smile when Richard slipped his hand over mine. "We'll be there soon," he said softly, staring out at the city as if it already belonged to him. We drove for hours, far beyond the skyline, until the world grew quiet and empty. No buildings, no people, just endless trees stretching against the horizon. By the time the car slowed, night had already fallen. The air outside was cold, damp, filled with the smell of wet earth. I stepped out, my heels sinking into the dirt, my breath clouding in the moonlight. The ground was uneven, soft, freshly turned, and that's when I saw it. A hole in the earth, too wide to be a mistake, too deep to be a coincidence. I froze, my pulse roaring in my ears. My lips trembled, but before I could speak, Richard's voice cut through the silence. "You always were too curious," he said, his tone almost tender. The men who had driven us stepped forward. I hadn't even realized how large they were until then. Their shadows swallowed me whole. Richard kissed my forehead, the way he used to when he left for meetings. And in that moment, I wanted to believe there was still love in him. But then his hand tightened against the back of my neck, pressing me forward, closer to the edge of that waiting grave. "Don't fight," he whispered. "It'll be easier." I screamed. I kicked. I begged. But my voice vanished into the night. The men's hands were iron, their grip unyielding. The last thing I saw before the world went dark was Richard Vale's face, calm, cold, and smiling. And then the dirt began to fall. When I woke, it wasn't in a bed or even in the back of that car. It was in silence. Heavy. Suffocating. The kind of silence that wraps itself around your throat and waits for you to break. My hands pressed against smooth wood. My knees bent against nothing but confinement. And when I opened my mouth to scream, dirt spilled between the cracks, choking me before the sound could rise. He had done it. Richard Vale had buried me alive. At first, I was paralyzed. My mind refused to understand what my body already knew, that I was underground, sealed in a box, minutes from being erased. I could almost hear his voice in my head, calm and cruel. "Don't fight. It'll be easier." But I couldn't give him what he wanted. Not yet. I slammed my fists against the coffin lid until my knuckles split. I kicked until my legs shook. Each thud echoed back, muffled by the earth, mocking me with its futility. The air was thinning. My lungs clawed for oxygen that wasn't there. My vision blurred. Panic clawed up my throat until it felt like fire. I thought of my sister, of the girl I used to be, of the woman I had become. And then I thought of him. His smile, his lies, his empire. That was when something inside me shifted. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't even hope. It was rage. I dealt with my nails until they tore. I pounded the wood until splinters sliced into my palms. Each breath was a war, each second a battle, but I refused to surrender. And then crack. The sound was faint, almost imagined. But then came another. A splinter. A fracture. A sliver of air so sharp it cut into my lungs like glass. I screamed, not in terror but in fury, and pushed harder. Wood gave way. Soil collapsed in, swallowing me, smothering me, but it also brought freedom. Cold air kissed my face as I clawed upward, inch by inch, until finally, my hand broke through the surface. The night sky stretched above me, endless and dark. I dragged myself out of the grave, gasping, coughing, sobbing, my body shaking with every breath. Dirt covered my face, blood painted my hands, but I was alive. Barely. And in that moment, one truth burned brighter than every. Star overhead, Richard Vale thought he buried me, but all he did was set me free. I stumbled down that deserted road barefoot, my body shaking with every step. My dress was torn, my skin raw, dirt still clinging to my lungs. Each breath burned like fire. The world should have looked the same, but it didn't. Every shadow felt sharper, every sound louder. I wasn't the woman who got into that car anymore. That woman had been buried. What crawled out of the grave was something else entirely. A passing truck slowed when the driver saw me. His eyes widened, but I couldn't explain, couldn't speak. He took me to the nearest town, where strangers whispered as they watched me stagger through the neon-lit diner, a ghost covered in soil and blood. They wanted answers. I gave them none. Because who would believe me? My billionaire husband buried me alive. It sounded insane, unreal, but I knew better. Richard had money, power, influence. If I went to the police, he'd own the narrative before I could open my mouth. They'd say I was unstable, that I ran away, that I made it all up. And maybe I would have believed it myself, if not for the scars on my hands and the dirt under my nails. So I kept quiet, and I listened. In that little town, every television was tuned to the same news report. Richard Vale, photographed at a gala the night before, smiling for cameras with a crystal glass raised in his hand. No sign of guilt, no sign of a missing wife. Just the perfect billionaire, the untouchable king. Watching him on that screen, something inside me hardened. He thought he had erased me. He thought his money could bury me forever. But he had no idea what he'd unleashed. Because I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to beg for justice in a world where he controlled every judge, every officer, every story. I was going to take from him the only thing that mattered more than love, more than loyalty, more than life itself. His empire. And I wasn't going to stop until Richard Vale was the one gasping for air, clawing at the dirt, begging for mercy that would never come. The first step wasn't rage. It was patience. I disappeared. No calls, no cards, no trace. I let Richard believe he had succeeded, because a man like him only makes mistakes when he thinks he's untouchable. While he basked in his wealth and his mistress's smile, I was gathering weapons of a different kind. Not guns, not knives, information. I found Marcus first. He'd been Richard's right-hand man for nearly a decade until Richard discarded him after a scandal Richard himself had caused. Marcus was bitter, ruined, drowning in whiskey and debt. When I told him what Richard did to me, he didn't laugh or question. He leaned in, his jaw tight, and whispered, "Then it's time he learns what it feels like to lose everything." From Marcus came the names of others Richard had destroyed. Partners stripped of companies, women silenced with contracts, families broken for profit, people scattered in the shadows, nursing wounds they couldn't heal. I sought them out one by one, whispering the truth he wanted buried. I showed them my scars, the dirt still trapped under my fingernails. I gave them something Richard never could, proof. And slowly, they became my army. Together, we built a map of his empire. Hidden accounts, offshore holdings, the shell companies he used to funnel money. Every secret Richard had buried in the dark, I dug up like bones. But it wasn't just about money. It was about trust. Richard had built his empire on the illusion of control, and I was going to crack it from the inside. I started small. Anonymous leaks to the press, whispers in boardrooms, little fractures in his spotless image. Enough to make people wonder if the king's crown was as polished as it looked. And as the cracks spread, Richard began to notice. At first, it was subtle. He tightened his circle, grew sharper in his tone, drank more at events. But then the mask slipped further. The charm thinned. The smile didn't reach his eyes anymore. He was afraid, and I wanted him afraid, because fear was only the beginning. I wasn't just coming for his money. I was coming for his reputation, his power, his throne. I was going to take everything, piece by piece, until the world no longer saw Richard Vale as a billionaire. They would see him the way I did, as a man digging his own grave. The night his empire fell was the night the city belonged to me. Richard Vale stood in his penthouse, glass walls stretching high above the skyline. From up there, he still thought he was untouchable, a god staring down at mortals. But outside, the streets hummed with a story he no longer controlled. Headlines screamed his crimes. Investors pulled their money in a frenzy. Board members called for emergency votes. His empire was rotting, and I was the one holding the match. He didn't know it yet, but I had already bought controlling shares through proxies. The very people he betrayed had signed their power over to me. Piece by piece, his kingdom had shifted into my hands. I walked into that penthouse in the same black suit I'd worn when he buried me. My heels clicked against the marble floor, sharp and steady, the sound of a woman who refused to stay underground. Richard turned, and for the first time, he looked small. His tuxedo hung loose, his tie undone, his eyes bloodshot. "You," he whispered, as if I were a ghost. "No," I said. "Not a ghost. A reckoning." He tried to smile, to charm, to spin words like he always had. He told me we could start over, rebuild together, make the world forget. But I'd already forgotten the part of me that ever loved him. On the table between us sat a thick folder. Documents. Proof of every fraud, every secret account, every illegal deal he ever touched. I slid it across to him. "This," I said, "is your coffin. And this time, I'm the one burying you." He lunged for me. Anger, desperation, fear, they all twisted across his face. But Marcus and the others stepped out from the shadows, men and women Richard had destroyed. They held him back, forced him down. For once, Richard Vale was powerless. The next morning, every news outlet in the country carried the story. Richard Vale, disgraced billionaire, indicted on dozens of charges, empire seized, assets frozen. And me. I stood on the balcony of that same skyscraper, watching the sun rise over a city that no longer whispered his name with admiration. They whispered mine. The woman who survived. The woman who took it all. For the first time in years, I felt the air fill my lungs without weight. Richard Vale buried me alive, but I climbed out of the grave. And when the world asked who won, it wasn't even a question.